For a long time, I told my MD that something was different in my brain. Something was not working right.
We don't see the glow in his eye anymore.
Happy face, smile face. I still do. It keeps going through my mind like, how did this happen?
It's just not the same. The disease not only kills the person with it, but kills the people around her.
It's like you had deserted your closest friend. It's okay.
To look back now, I have these great regrets and guilt because I didn't have the patience with him.
She's asked me to withhold all life support so she gets that bad. How do I choose?
The bright, young, and able are the very backbone of a healthy society. But a lethal and devastating disease is lying in wait for these young professionals who are at the peak of their career, the very prime of life.
When I decided to be a financial advisor, my boss said at the first luncheon, "You'll never make it." And 3 years later, he said, "You made it." I made it to the top 1% of 10,000.
Well, I consider us both to be very successful businesswomen. We both kept just booming in our jobs because we were very passionate about what we were doing in our lives.
I always was wanting to do the things that they said I couldn't do. But I did.
It's really hard to think about all that now because things have kind of changed a lot.
I became really sad when I started noticing I was a fast on my feet thinker, which just started fading away. I wasn't as fast.
Christy, you want to sit down? Come on over here. Christy was, the whole women's lib thing. She was it. She was working from the time in high school. She kept her same last name through her marriage. She got her master's degree. She ended up working for a pharmaceutical company in the marketing division. She was one of the first women managers. Glass ceiling, she was gonna break it. They had her tracked to be up there, doing very well.
When she all of a sudden, came back from maternity leave and she went back part-time, it just wasn't working out, and she was coming home frustrated and not able to articulate what was wrong. And then one day she just came home and said, "I quit." That's when I was like, absolutely positively something's wrong. It's no longer something's not right, it's something's wrong.
Judy was very talented in doing administrative kind of details. She did a lot of wonderful things. She started hospice with a group of people in Chatham County from scratch. She did a study, and the results of her study was presented in Chicago. So she did a lot of good professional work. I see this wonderful person that has all this potential, all this caring, all this loving, and all this intellect, and all of a sudden it begins to just go away.
Oh my God, he did beautiful work.
He worked for cabinet makers when he first got out of school, and he was really good at woodworking, and even his artwork yet today, he's really particular about.
Right. They were happy when Tanner was born. We were standing outside the door, and he come out and he was all happy. It's a boy, and crying. From like 2000 on, I kept saying, something's wrong with Chris. Chris isn't right.
Doesn't seem like Chris.
It wasn't Chris.
There was different things that we kind of thought was...
Yeah, his wife would say, "Oh, he's tired. Chris
strange.
is tired." He'd come home, we'd talk to him, "What's wrong, Chris?" "Oh, I'm just tired." He seemed fine.
My brother growing up was a kind of a quiet child, very gentle soul, and very family, very conservative. He later became a detective where he was on the force for 29 years. We were extremely close family, and there were no secrets, no secrets.
Well, then the next thing, we knew Mike was having a little bit of trouble. He wanted to know if I wouldn't send him an album of the family because he wasn't remembering the names of any of the family, which he knew everybody.
Getting lost, or not being able to think of a word, or stopping halfway through a sentence, or not being able to do math in your head. Little things may not be individually significant, but added up, they foreshadow an unexpected turn.
I knew something was wrong, I just didn't know how or where to go next.
It was frightening because we didn't know what it was. She knew there was a problem, but I didn't know how serious it was.
I couldn't find words, and that was really unusual for me.
She appeared so regular at times and so normal at times, but then there are other times that she just wasn't okay.
It starts slowly, marked by small signs which can be both alarming and frustrating. No one understands what is happening, and their loved ones are confused by the changes that are uncharacteristic, hard to pinpoint, and even offensive.
With Susan, she had symptoms of executive dysfunction. So the problem solving, the multitasking ability, concentration, forgetfulness, frustrating to the point where she wasn't able to work.
Of course, Mike, it was hard to see his starting up. He was slower to get it out.
All he knows is my body's failing me. I can't remember anything. People are pulling away from me.
I first met Chris about 5 years ago. He came with his parents. They were confused about the diagnosis that he had received. He seemed to have previously been a fine, upstanding citizen, a terrific kid, but there seemed to have been a change.
We got a phone call that Chris had this episode that he destroyed his truck at his house. I mean, literally destroyed it. Just, there wasn't a window in it. There wasn't.
Miswrecked it. Spray painted it.
Just went off on it.
His wife called me. I said, "Chris, what happened?" Chris, I don't know. He didn't know he even did it.
I went out and, destroyed my truck. But I don't know why I did that.
He was having difficulty controlling his behavior. His behavior was becoming more impulsive.
For a while, the victim may be able to compensate, but eventually the symptoms become impossible to disguise. Often, the sufferer loses their job, the families are pulled apart, and the children are left helpless victims.
I just kept feeling like she was so detached from me, and I had a hard time articulating it, but I just felt like she was that way, not just with me, but with everybody. Little tiny things that any one of these things a normal person might do, but when you add them together, it just wasn't normal.
It paints a picture.
Yeah, it was small behavior changes.
And I think one of the real key things that told me that I was seeing something go awry was when she would ask me to drive her to work. That was totally out of character for her. And what she was really saying is, I don't know that I'll be able to find my way back. And that was quite alarming. This intelligent, sensitive, caring woman, and all of a sudden she isn't sure she knows the way home.
Most people with this disease are misdiagnosed, because the symptoms and the speed of degeneration vary from patient to patient, and early preclinical signs look very similar to several other disorders or diseases.
For a long time, I told my MD that something was different in my brain. Something was not working right.
They just kept saying it's too much stress. You're probably going through menopause. You need more sleep. We'll give you more drugs.
There were so many other things going on in my life at that period that they attributed it to depression.
So we started out with the whole depression theory, and what I kept thinking is there's something wrong, I don't know what it is, but we've got to get her to a doctor, we've got to get her. We had her, I think, for it was close to 2 years seeing a depression therapist specialist. Because Christy maybe blew off 3 out of every 4 appointments, it took a very long time for her to finally say, it's not depression, it's something else.
There was a lot of anger on Christy's part. We had no clue what was going on.
We had no diagnosis. So, everything goes I go, well, he had bouts where he would be drinking. I think, is he turning into an alcoholic? Then I'm thinking, has he had a stroke? Because he's losing his ability to speak. That was the other thing we thought. Okay, well, maybe he's had a stroke. Have him tested for that? No, he hasn't had a stroke.
And the doctor there on the second day told us that he was manic depressive bipolar. And I went home and I looked up on the computer, manic depressive bipolar, because we're thrown into this thing, we know nothing about it. And he only exhibited like 5 of the 10 or 12 things that these people supposedly exhibit. Can you be sure that that's what it is? He said, well, there's other tests we could do. I said, well, why aren't you doing it?
This really comes down to clinical suspicion. This looks different from what I'm used to seeing, knowing when to refer, knowing when not to. And I was taught through medical school and residency that the patient family is almost always right. I think that dictum is amazingly consistent. And if they really sound like, I just don't know if this is correct, seek another opinion.
My doctor never did believe me. And I finally just had my own neuropsych test done. I went to a psychologist. She then said, I'll bet you've lost half your IQ. Dang. I was just upset as...
She had memory issues, but otherwise she was brilliant. She could still maintain certain things.
So when I went to see the doctor, the neurologist, she said, you have Alzheimer's.
I never dreamt in a million years it'd be Alzheimer's, because I always labeled Alzheimer's as something in the 60s or 70s. And she was 53.
It didn't seem like Alzheimer's, but I didn't know a thing about the brain. All I knew was it wasn't working right.
We didn't know what we were seeing. It wasn't Alzheimer's, but it was something that took their memories away, especially their short-term memory.
At that point, even though I was upset about the diagnosis, I didn't believe it really was Alzheimer's. There was just something about the way she acted that was not your typical Alzheimer's behaviors. So I guess after that, we kept looking for answers.
We had to go find a second opinion. And it turns out that I had 6 different diagnoses.
As we talked to these doctors, they were suggesting all kinds of different diseases, and there was not an answer yet. And they kept saying, well, we've pretty much run all the tests. And we'd say, no, you gotta have more tests than this. There's gotta be an answer.
Often misdiagnosed as psychological disorders or Pick's disease or early onset Alzheimer's, this issue is compounded by the lack of knowledge about FTD among primary care physicians. Most patients are told that they are just tired or depressed, to just wait a year and come back to see if anything has changed. Such mistakes may cost the patients their jobs, their families, and precious time as they lose mental ground.
And to find out after weeks of tests, this doctor diagnosed me with probable FTD. It was so much of a relief because of the various doctors we'd been to, and it was worth every penny to find out what the heck I had.
The heavens opened up. My brother and sister aren't crazy. You know, Michael wasn't nuts, he was ill, you know, and my sister's not crazy, she's ill. And there's a name to it. It actually has a name. And at that point, they called it frontotemporal dementia.
Frontotemporal dementia. It strikes early and fast, robbing its victims of their minds and lives. It has only been recognized for the last few decades, but was previously grouped with Pick's dementia. Despite having only been recently acknowledged, FTD is a serious problem.
FTD is a very big issue for society, and the patient with FTD tends to be younger. These are individuals who ordinarily would be contributing productively to society.
And so people with FTD are very likely to have children in the home, to have partners who are young and reaching the peak of their, or about to reach the peak of their careers. All the things that we sort of image as being part of our 40s and 50s and 60s, that sort of powerful period, if you will, of I finally figured out how to live my life and now I'm ready to go do it. All of a sudden, this disease can completely change the course of a life cycle for lots of people.
Frontotemporal dementia is the second most common dementia after Alzheimer's disease, particularly in individuals under the age of 65.
FTD more commonly affects people who are younger than Alzheimer's disease. So we're seeing now many, many more people affected by aging-related degenerative conditions of the brain.
Frontotemporal dementia affects a part of the brain differently than Alzheimer's disease, and therefore the symptoms are quite different.
FTD is a condition that affects younger folks. Alzheimer's disease, the frequency of Alzheimer's disease increases in the population with age.
And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to really be certain and that they do have FTD, because sometimes they could be confused with, for example, patients that have a maybe psychiatric or any kind of manifestation that are not due to dementia but due to behavior of maybe schizophrenia, things like that.
You can tell the difference between frontotemporal dementia and Alzheimer's disease with great certainty with a PET scan, and especially in cases where it's challenging clinically. Frontotemporal dementia and Alzheimer's disease are treated with different medications. And so it's very important for the patients to know and the doctors to know to be able to effectively treat the disease.
One group estimated that roughly 250,000 people in the United States are affected by FTD right now. It's still common enough that it should be recognized.
And this is now a motivation for us, not just for our laboratory, but for the nation, to do something about a growing epidemic of brain degenerations that's a killer as much as cancer is a killer, that will lead obviously to great pain, anguish, and sorrow for the families affected.
The second most common dementia next to Alzheimer's. And yet, most doctors have never heard of FTD and are misdiagnosing it. In the meantime, professionals and working people, the very mortar of society, are being affected by hundreds of thousands. But how does FTD work? What exactly does it do to the brain?
Patients with frontotemporal dementia have atrophy of both the frontal as well as temporal lobes.
The frontal part of the brain controls things like executive functioning and emotions, decision-making, and social skills. The temporal lobe controls memory.
If we look and take a section through the brain, approximately here, that encompasses both portions of the frontal as well as temporal lobes, we can take a section of the brain like that, orient it approximately like this, and then look more closely at the structures in the brain.
These conditions are due to the accumulation of proteins in our brain that are no longer metabolized normally. And you can think of the proteins as clogging up the brain cells. And because they clog up the brain cells, they make the brain cells atrophic. As they get smaller, it interferes with the brain cell functioning, and eventually the brain cells die.
So we'll take a look at both normal as well as brain from a patient with frontotemporal dementia. As you can see here, we have the frontal lobe of the normal brain and the frontal lobe of the patient with FTD.
Obviously, the unimpaired brain is quite large compared to the brain from the patient with FTD. Because the accumulation of protein causes the brain cells to die, the brain itself shrinks. But protein accumulation is only part of the problem.
The tau gene, its full name is the microtubule-associated protein tau.
Tau is a protein that is found predominantly in brain cells, and what it does is stabilize these structures called microtubules, and microtubules allow things to be transported from one part of the cell to another.
Imagine that these microtubules are like bridges in the brain, which need struts to stabilize them. Tau are the struts, functioning to hold the microtubules together. If a strut collapses, the bridge will fall. If tau collapses, communication ceases between the cells and the neuron can no longer function and will die. The debris from the collapsed tau bundles and is called tau tangles.
So tau was identified as a key player in FTD. We don't know why it began to accumulate in the cell body of nerve cells, but they do, and this is a million-dollar question. We don't know why.
Just as we don't know why tau collapses and accumulates, we also don't know all of the reasons a person would get FTD. But we do know that genetics is a big part of the equation.
Genetics is something that affects all of us in the sense that we all have inherited our information from our parents, from our moms, from our dads. We all have a family history of something. You can think about a gene like a recipe. The gene tells the body how to make a certain type of protein. So when you hear someone talking about the tau protein is made by the tau gene, which we all have. It's all within our human genome. When we talk about tau mutations or progranulin mutations, that's the way we signify that there's a change. And there's a change in the gene that's causing the protein to either not be made correctly or it can't read the recipe at all and no protein gets made.
With tau, if you have a mutation, you're pretty much guaranteed you will show signs of the illness at some point in your life.
These changes are usually inherited. They're inherited down through the family, from parent to child through the generations.
The implications for family is huge. As many as half of people with FTD have a family history, so we think that genetics play a big role.
Our family has 9 siblings, 7 girls, 2 boys. We didn't know this existed in our family, that it was a genetic defect that has happened until a year or two ago. We saw that it was in our mother and one of our sisters. So we had a guess that it was, but there was no proof until fairly recently.
We knew that at some point that there was a probability that it was something that was being passed down. For each of the family members that I've seen, which is about 8 or 10 now, it's almost like clockwork. And the irony is that each of them present differently. Judy and Joyce, they have the same disease. Basically, they should be at the same stage, but they're not. Joyce is 61, Judy is 59. Joyce should be a lot further in the process, but you see how cognitive, how sharp Joyce is, and Judy, who is not at all sharp at all anymore.
Judy, I know you have 2 daughters. What are your daughters' names?
Amanda and Jennifer.
And do you have any grandkids?
No.
Joyce, does she have any grandkids?
I think she does. I have some grandchildren.
How old are your grandkids?
Oh. Let's see. I was trying to think. Herb, how old are they? 7 and 13. I was thinking there was a pretty long stretch, but I couldn't remember how much.
That is a big difference in age. Do you guys know their names?
Yeah.
What are their names? Your grandkids' names?
Jennifer and... No, that's your daughter's name. What are the grandkids' names, Herb? Oh, yeah, Dalen and Anna.
When an individual that has a gene mutation has a child, there's a 50% chance that they'll pass on the copy of the gene that carries the mutation.
I was very frightened about this from the beginning, as soon as I was old enough to know what was going on, because I knew there was the probability on down the road that it would become a part of my life.
Then there's a group of people with frontotemporal dementia that we don't understand. And some of those might be in families and some of them aren't. Maybe they only have one brother or sister, or maybe none. And if their parents died before you might get FTD, you really don't know whether that's an inherited form or not. In other situations, it might not be an inherited form of the disease. So there's a lot about FTD we know, and there's a lot about FTD we don't know about.
Probably 50 to 80% of familial FTD, we still haven't found the genes.
The more we understand about the proteins that cause disease, the more we understand about the genetics that relate to those proteins, the more we're going to understand why these diseases occur and what we can do to stop them.
Scientists are hard at work figuring out this disease, and there is hope for a cure. But a growing number of FTD patients and their families continue to suffer.
With Patsy, she was upset. She knew something was going on, and she just didn't know how to cope with it. I think her brain wasn't giving her the options at that point of knowing what else to do.
It hurt me so bad, but I was with the kids. I tried to do everything I could. And so, as I say, there's times I've sat down and cried.
He couldn't have long conversations, so he had little yellow sticky notes that had like everybody's birthdays and have a nice day, because that was him. He never said a bad word about anybody.
He waited for Terry to call her that day, and that night he shot himself.
You know, you just... Sorry. Sorry. When I look back at it, you know, that's his choice. I would have been happy to take care of him, but
he didn't want it.
Instead of us all thinking, you know, that he was just crazy, you know. It helps to know what's going on, you know.
What does it feel like to you? Can you tell that you have something? Do you know what it means to you?
Not really. I can think good, but I can remember a lot of stuff. But,
we don't see the glow in his eye anymore, none of that, you know.
Happy face, smile face. I still do. It keeps going through my mind, like, how did this happen? Did I drop him or, you know, bang his head? Or it's hard, and we still do. Dennis and I think about it a lot, like how, when, where, what happened, how did this happen?
Tell me the names of your sons again.
Tanner and Garrett.
Do you remember the day Tanner was born?
He's not the same person. It's hard.
I think the thing that is the most distraughtful is to see what they become at the end. That person that you loved sitting there staring at a wall in a catatonic state. It's too hard to watch. Just too hard to watch. It's like you had deserted your closest friend. It's okay.
To see your sibling go through this is just...
The phrase she used, I remember this, kiss of death.
Don't you remember Mom having similar characteristics?
Well,
Yeah.
I remember
I knew that what Christy had was what Mom had. I knew it from day one.
At least it lets us understand why we grew up in the environment in which we grew up.
The whole question about family and, now that we know what the disease is, it just explained everything, Growing up and just not understanding what was wrong with it. It was so hard. And I just loved her. And it was so hard to understand what was wrong with her, and I tried. I tried to get help for her, but we just didn't get it right. I thought she committed suicide because she had breast cancer and she let it go. And she let it go. She just didn't tell anybody. And it was because of her dementia. She didn't.
Yes, I have the genetic flaw, but there's nothing about me that's changed. Both Dr. Beauvais and Dr. Taylor have stated that it may or may not get worse, okay? So with that type of statement, you don't know for sure. It may or may not.
Are you at all scared that it might?
I pray that it doesn't.
It's just a slow decline. I just am tragically going downhill.
It's devastating. It's just not the same. The disease not only kills the person with it, but kills the people around it.
If I talk about it, I can handle it better. I can make sense out of what's next, maybe. So what's next? I don't know. I don't know what's next. Oh, yeah.
FTD is really humiliating. That they take the person and take pieces away one at a time. Her pieces are coming apart. And I keep trying to cover it up, that it's not that bad. And it is getting worse.
I just don't want to lose my voice, because how in the heck am I going to communicate stuff? I quit. I'm done. I'm serious.
And I'm not ready for her to die. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. I really do not want her to die. I want her to live. And I don't think God's going to give me that choice.
Though FTD is devastating, there is hope on several fronts. researchers and scientists are working fervently towards a cure, while technological advances and imaging have accelerated trials and research.
The more that the patients and their family members are involved in the research process, they're going to play a really important key in helping us understand why FTD occurs. Their involvement by taking part in clinical trials, overall research studies, brain imaging, all that information is going to come together and give us really the tools we need, the information we need to hopefully develop a cure.
What imaging can do is allow the doctors to know how to treat these patients, allow the patients some certainty about what's going on in their lives.
MRI scans sometimes are very informative or diagnostic. When they're not, a PET scan is critical, is absolutely critical. The MRI features can all look either relatively normal or only mildly impaired, or may show things that don't fit entirely with an FTD picture, but the PET scan really solidifies an FTD diagnosis.
PET imaging tells us which cells are alive and which are dead. So in that sense, the imaging that we do is a real eye-opener. It allows us to see how the different parts of the brain are working. We know that the brain has regional functions. Certain places do things that other places don't. So would that mean that to know everything about the brain, we'd have to then do biopsies of every different part of the brain to really identify the areas that are being affected? It's a very complicated and intricate organ that we don't have access to. Now, here's the really exciting part. When you look at somebody's brain and you're able to say that this part of the brain is working and this part isn't, and that's why you have the symptoms that you have, I think it's a big comfort to people to know that there's an actual explanation for what they're feeling.
Because PET scans show so clearly which parts of the brain are atrophying and failing, it can rule out Alzheimer's, Huntington's, Parkinson's, and a number of other diseases, while providing the most definitive diagnosis available for FTD. Unfortunately, many physicians do not understand the significance of PET scans and often overlook them as a resource.
Many times, technologies like PET that are new on the forefront of medical care are not always the first thing that doctors are aware of. I mean, there isn't a great deal of publicity, and so it's not atypical for physicians out in clinical practice to be as surprised as anybody else that this is something that's available. So patients should feel entirely comfortable in requesting a PET scan, FTD PET scan, to try to clarify the issue.
Having a true diagnosis puts everybody at ease. And that's why the PETs are so important. But the reality check comes. It's terminal.
While imaging is a useful tool in diagnosing FTD and in determining if a treatment is working, numerous clinical trials are vigorously pursuing a cure.
Probably the more hopeful thing is there are many drugs in clinical trials now. Now, a lot of drugs when they get to clinical trials fail, but when you have a lot of, irons in the fire, one of them might work. So I think there's the great hope. The more we understand, the more targets we have. The more targets we have, the better chance we have of something working really well. If you had a drug, you might be able to find a drug that stopped the damage from progressing, but it might be very difficult or maybe impossible to get a drug that actually restores somebody's brain back to normal. So the ultimate goal is to have something that prevents a person from getting one of these diseases before the damage actually starts.
Today, robots and computers have vastly accelerated drug trials, as they can do in a week what used to take months or even years to do by hand. In combination with engineered mice, a cure is a very real possibility.
If you know the physiology, you can come up with treatments. Find the genes, put them into transgenic mouse models, study the effects of medicines, and anything that works, bring it to human use.
So there are FTD mice models, and these are created by putting the human gene, for example, for tau, into a mouse and making the mouse make the human protein. So there's an early stage that is going on in the mouse and most likely going on in humans that we can't see, and we can't see by giving somebody a memory test or a behavior test, but it's going on in the brain of people, just like it's going on in this mouse.
We can see a disease process unfold in a mouse and then intervene with the drug to block it, to arrest it dead in its track or prevent it.
Once you kill the mice, you say, well, what are the possibilities? We can take that and treat patient with it. And so that's why the mice are extremely important.
So that if we could detect FTD well before it becomes clinically manifest, a therapeutic intervention is undoubtedly going to be more effective.
The breakthrough may be just around the corner, but hope does not end there. While medicine is charging forward, each of us can have the assurance of hope, even in the face of the darkest news, if we start planning for hope.
You kind of need to form a team right away. Once you've figured out that you have enough problem that you're not going to be able to live life as you have been, you need to form a team that includes your medical professionals. You've got the disability group, you've got the finance group, and you've got the legal group.
I ask people to think through you're in your physician's office right now, and they're telling you at 30 years old you can never perform the duties in your own occupation again. And it's one thing to be sick or diagnosed with an illness, and it's another thing to be sick and broke. I mean, and that's what it ends up happening if people don't take the precautionary measures ahead of the diagnosis.
It's very challenging to get any kind of insurance product, even if you've maybe just had some tests that were proved that you were healthy. That can be enough to trigger a denial of coverage.
That's right.
It's very challenging out there. It's a bad
Plan
situation.
early and often. Just plan it, and plan the contingencies. Even if you think there's nothing in all of life that can go wrong, you've got to look at it.
The evidence would suggest that most people have an awareness there's something wrong, but they don't think it's a big deal. Okay? And because we also know that people actually fear losing their cognitive functions more than they fear death. But the process needs to always include at least a neurological exam, which usually includes some sort of brain imaging to allow you to know whether there are parts of the brain that are structurally wrong, structurally malformed at this point, or in the ideal world, some kind of a brain activation scan like a PET scan where you can literally look at the parts of the brain that are activated or underactivated. But it's very important that you, as the keeper of your own health care, keep advocating and reporting the symptoms you're experiencing. And just keep working it to get the right name, to get the right treatment.
So what do I do next to stay healthy? And I'm doing lots of strengthening of the brain with software and constantly thinking of what I can learn new.
Most of the people I work with delay filing a claim for Social Security disability benefits because they think they'll get better, they think they'll go back to work. It's a really big step for people. I absolutely see people filing for bankruptcy and having severe financial hardships before they even get to the point of being able to file a Social Security claim, let alone obtain benefits. So for people to rely on Social Security and not have adequate financial planning, disability insurance, health insurance, it puts people in a very bad position.
So planning becomes terribly important as soon as you have the inkling of an idea that there may be something that's impairing your cognitive ability. And I think the first thing is to think about, who do I trust? Anytime you're talking about a trust, a will, a power of attorney, or an advanced treatment directive, you're asking not only what do I want to do, but who do I want to do it for me?
What any family can do is to have a series of conversations in which you share the information about the medical condition and about the caregiving circumstance and the legal decisions and the financial decisions. If what we want to do is help the family all be on the same page, then you've got to be fair and give everybody the same information. You can invite somebody to be a facilitator of family conversations. And we got to look at that whole context because the primary carer also has a body, a self, and a life. And in many of the cases with FTD, they have children and other responsibilities. So What are your 3 secrets for surviving?
First, you get a good therapist.
Yes.
You have to have somebody who will listen to you. Because there are some things you just don't say to your loved one. Besides taking care of myself and having a support system around me and doing activities, I have a team of doctors that I can call on at any time of the day or night. And that was a hard thing to get established at first, because I figured I can do it all. And as a caregiver, I can't do it all. I have to have other people in my life who understand, and that includes friends. And then the other issue is educating myself, constantly educating myself, constantly talking to other people or reading books. I take on her disease also. I'm feeling what she's feeling. I'm feeling the discrimination on some of the words when we go to hospitals, like dementia's a nasty word.
A lot of people are in favor of changing the word dementia to disease.
I see.
Because dementia has a whole stigma about it.
One of the things I liked about what you said is that you want to not be pushed aside because you have a disease and you share bearing that disease. And I think one of the messages you can give people is don't avoid us.
Right.
Or if she calls me by the wrong name, don't worry about it.
Yes.
When someone develops any kind of cognitive impairment, the whole world just goes away.
Because they're scared.
They're scared and uncomfortable. They don't know how to respond to someone if they're different socially. I mean, you've said a lot in what you've just said, Cindy. I mean, you talked about taking care of yourself physically, and we always use that airplane analogy of you got to put the oxygen on yourself before you put it on your kid. The same thing's true about any carer. You have to do that. You have to make sure that your network of people that are going to be a part of your life are on the same page with you.
Right.
You have to make sure you have a support team that can help you with the practical issues.
Preparing a safety net requires planning and a team of experts far in advance of actually receiving the bad news. By age 40, everyone should have experts gathered around them and have plans in place for whatever the future may hold, be it FTD, dementia, cancer, or any other life-changing diagnosis.
The financial impact is profound. Many of these individuals are bright as their baseline, professionals, very successful, have solid incomes, and they can no longer work.
When the disease came, I already had purchased disability insurance, an individual policy. I had purchased long-term care, which I want to say to all the financial advisors out there, everybody needs to buy this at age 40.
Anytime I had opportunity to sign up for long-term care, I would always do it at the maximum level. If I didn't have any of that coverage, I would have had to have sold my home. I would not have the medical care I have at this point. I would not have the safety net, and I would be destitute.
So many people become destitute out of a situation like this. Everyone thinks something else is going on, and you usually get fired before that occurs. So John is incredibly lucky.
A diagnosis as fast as I did in about a 3.5 month period was crucial for me, because I was able to get a diagnosis and go over to a short-term disability before I got fired.
He went and got a living trust to protect his assets so that would be available for him.
When I did get a diagnosis and I would go to visit Mom, going in there is like looking at the pits of hell, because someday it's going to be me. It's going to be me not knowing what's going on.
And he has been very, very sensitive to ensuring that all of his decisions enables me to not be impacted through that process, which allows me to be able to support myself down the road when we know that's going to have to happen. So to me, that's so very important, and it's a gift.
For me, it means that I can move on with life. It means that instead of being in financial ruin, I can have a life. I have the chance to live now. But at the same time, they are taken care of. They're not in an old folks home where they're not going to be taken care of. They're in a good place that people care for them, and they're going to care for them for the rest of their lives.
But even those in the middle of the most difficult stages of FTD, the patients, families, and caregivers can create hope in the way that they handle the stress and the difficulties of their circumstances.
So when we think about providing care for anyone with any kind of disability or illness, we're always thinking of two people. We're thinking of the person with the disease, and we're thinking of the primary carer.
You don't want to be angry at the person who's ill, that you have to leave a career you love and the people you're working with you love. And because you love the person that has the illness, and you have to figure out, how do I take care of me and her now?
So I think that one of the things that we need to think about in families is how to have the conversation in a form that the person with the disease can say whatever they have ability to say.
When Susan loses something or has a loss, I have the same loss. I feel how she feels. And I think that's probably a real important thing for caregivers. They have to know what that person's losing and has to be there understanding what's going on.
Often it falls to the carer to educate their network. That, okay, if my loved one does X, just do Y. You know, it's not you don't have to go away. Just here's how you handle it in the middle of a bridge game. Don't worry about it.
For us, working with healthcare professionals and education and early diagnosis is so paramount, because we have all these kids coming up and we want it better for them. Because you know what? It was better for Patsy than it was for Michael. And it was because of a diagnosis.
She had a lot of care,
Yeah.
better care.
It was late diagnosis. What could have happened if we had had early diagnosis?
The hope is in the genetic side of it. They're finding mutations all the time. If they found the mutation, perhaps they could do something for me, but probably not. And that's okay. I still have hope that they can help my nieces and nephews.
So the hope is in the science, and the hope is in the family decisions. The family decision to become conscious of what's going on, not deny, move toward getting information, accepting, and above all, talking. Another piece of hope is in the sense of purpose. And not just folding your hands and saying, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm a patient.
Right.
I'm not a patient, I'm a person.
Right.
And I'm a person who can have a purpose.
There is hope. She's doing everything she can to help educate people, and especially her family.
There is not today a cure, but you don't need to give up. Live the best you can live.
We all hold an enormous amount of hope. I think hope's about the only thing that you got left, you know, really. Hope. That's it.
Hope. That's what we're looking for. That's what this documentary is about, sharing hope. If there is no hope, there's only despair. So now we have hope.